Hello, Nicole and Matt. How are y'all doing today?
Good, thank
Good. How are
you.
you?
I'm doing good. I'm so excited to chat with you both about The Last Duel. I really enjoyed it so very much, and it was a film that I didn't know what to expect going in, and it just, the different acts and how everything played out, it just stuck with me long, long after I left. So,
Good.
Nicole, I'll start with you first because I want to talk about the third act, which I think is the most pivotal of all the acts. And how
Yeah.
important was it for you to tell a story like this? Because in period pieces, we're so used to stories being told where it's just strictly from the male gaze, and
Mhm.
you don't really think that a woman will have agency because of her circumstances. And in this film, we see that despite those circumstances, Marguerite still holds on. So how important was it for you to have a story like this set during this time?
Great question.
That is a good question. And, Matt and Ben kind of handed it to me on a platter because I knew what the other two sections were going to be like. And here was a chance to tell this woman's truth. And it was the actual truth. And I had never heard of her. I think most people hadn't heard of her. And the research, there was very little about her and much more about the two fellas because, they were dueling and they were knights and they were dudes. So it was really important for me to make her a three-dimensional person. It was obvious to all of us that, this kind of shit is still going on. And sorry if I can't curse, but it's it's very relevant today, although that's not what drew me in. And what drew me in was this particular story and the bravery of this particular woman.
Actually, to follow on to that, because I love that question, but that was the whole construct, was this idea that you'd have two acts of a movie that did what movies always do, right? Which is totally ignore and overlook the woman, and the women in the first two acts kind of are manifested by the men in terms of how they need them, whether they need them for their own adulation or whatever. But then in the third act was this idea is to reveal this world of women that's been entirely overlooked, not only in our movie but in every other movie. And that was where, why we needed Nicole and begged her to do to come work with us.
They didn't beg me.
But we begged, totally begged.
No.
But because as she said, like, the men really wrote down the history is all what the men were doing.
Yeah,
the women, she had to create, like, Ben and I wrote an adapted screenplay. We adapted the book. There was no, Nicole had to write an original act, which was like creating this woman's life. And
What's cool, I think, too, is like you want to go to the movie and think, why did Jodie Comer take this part?
right.
She's got this crappy little part as the wife
for the first hour
and
or whatever.
and you think,
the
poor
thing.
Jodie Comer.
That's the magic of the movie, because it after those
Yeah.
two acts, and then you see this third act, and you're like, wow,
Right.
this is it. Like this is
yeah,
Right.
yeah. This is what I came for. And that was what was exciting about the way the architecture of the screenplay was. Really, that was the fun of it.
Yeah. And Matt, I want to also talk about John, and kind of how, like, the audience's view of him kind of warps as the acts go on, because as each one goes on, he's portrayed more unsympathetically, and you get to see, like, okay, this is actually the real John, not the one that we saw in the beginning, and not even the one in the second act. So how did you approach how it continues to work through the film, both as a screenwriter and when you were portraying the character?
That was the fun of acting in the movie, was you kind of play three parts, right?
All at once, too.
Yeah.
You do one and then another.
Do
and then
one and
another,
then another.
right?
And so we had, on set, we were very aware, right? This scene is in Adam's story. This scene is in my story. This scene is in Jodie's story. So you play your character the way you see yourself, and we're all kind of the heroes of our own narratives, right? And so everything that Carouge, my character, does in the first act makes total sense. It's like, it's a classic Knight's Tale. He's doing the honorable thing. He's fighting for the honor of his wife, and et cetera, et cetera.
And he's good in bed.
Yeah. And then you reveal he is awful in bed by the third act. And among other things, like he's vain, and he's
stupid,
ambitious and selfish and irascible and jealous and all of these things. And that was the fun of playing, who he really was versus how he saw himself. Yeah. And in fact, I would say too, like, Jodie had the most difficult job. Jodie's Jody is not a human being. Like the culture didn't recognize Marguerite as a human being, right? She was property. And so in the first two acts, she's very different from, you know, how she appears as a fully fleshed out three-dimensional human being in the third act, because she's the only person narrator who really understands that she's a human being.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. I really enjoyed this chat, and I can't wait for everyone to see this film. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You have a good one.
Bye.
Yeah, you too.